This episode of Job Shadowing HE is brought to you by Seats One, the all-in-one platform trusted by top universities like Cambridge and Oxford. Seats One helps higher education institutions tackle critical challenges such as student attendance, engagement and dropout prevention. With real-time analytics, proactive outreach and an early alert system, Seats One supports student success while enhancing space utilisation and optimising resources. If you're looking to make data-driven decisions, improve financial outcomes and streamline operations, visit seatsoftware.com to learn more. I'm Susanna Marsden and welcome to Job Shadowing HE, the podcast that delves into the roles of people working in higher education. Each episode hears from guests about what's involved in their role, the career path that led to it, and tips on how to get in and get on in these jobs. My guest in this episode is David Gilani, Head of Student Engagement and Advocacy at Middlesex University, as well as being a prominent figure in the wider sector, including through WONKI and the Association of Higher Education Professionals. In this episode, David shares more about his leadership of and thoughts on student engagement and what that means to support student success. He also reflects upon his own career path to date and how and why the student engagement professional niche has become so much more prominent across the sector in recent years. David also offers insight about the benefits of being part of an institution's board and looks forward to where the sector focus on student belonging needs to be in the next 5 years. David, welcome to Job Shadowing HE and thanks for being my guest today. Let's start with some background to your role. You're Head of Student Engagement and Advocacy at Middlesex University, a post you've held since 2019. Give us an overview of what your role involves and can you share a bit more about your team and also where you fit organisationally within the university?
Yeah, of course. Hi, Susanna. Thanks very much for having me on the podcast. Really nice to be here. Student engagement, I know it's the type of role that lots of different people have in universities, but often means different things. So organisationally, I'll start with that. Our team has moved around a bit over the years. I'm sure that's something that many others will relate to in terms of different structures within universities. We currently are sitting within the strategic communications area, actually. So our team is mainly comprised of functions around communications with students, running events and campaigns with students. Interestingly, though, we look at after the student journey from the point of enrolment onwards, and that includes alumni relations as well. So we've got those functions for current students, but we also look after communications and engagement campaigns for our alumni community as well. So it's quite a broad remit in terms of the length of the student journey. And we have sat in other areas in the university. So we have been within the Learning and Teaching Directorate in the past. I know a lot of other universities would have student engagement within some form of student experience or student life, student support directorate. It's often the case that wherever you're based, you just have to work with lots of different people in different areas, but that's the setup we've got at Middlesex.
And one of the common themes that comes up from many guests on the podcast is that their career paths have very much evolved rather than being pre-planned. Although for some guests, there has definitely been a more sort of certain planning process. So I'm interested to know some more about your career path evolution, where your focus on student engagement and student belonging stem from, how it's developed through the roles that you've had, and what continues your drive.
Yeah, I love talking about this kind of stuff because I do feel very lucky that I get to work in a job that I enjoy so much. And I know there are lots of other people who enter the world of higher education and aren't sure how to get this type of role. So if I can do anything to help demystify that process, then obviously that's the great thing about this podcast, really, isn't it? So my journey started through the Students' Union background. So I was an elected Students' Union officer, one of those people that obviously thought way too much of themselves in terms of self-confidence to put themselves forward in an election, running around the campus with our campaign activities. So I was elected there as originally Vice President Communications and then President at the University of Southampton. And one of the things, I suppose, that came up during my time at the Students' Union was this issue around how the university communicated with its current students. So it was through that the university then turned around and said, look, you've been talking a lot around how we don't do enough to engage our current students. We don't have enough in place to proactively communicate with them. We're often relying on you and the students' union to get messages out to students. And we were saying that's just not going to work long term, because what happens when you want to communicate something that the students' union disagrees with? How are you going to reach your students there? So they turned around and said, well, come over and do a research project for us on what student communications could look like and how we could do that at the University of Southampton. So, that was kind of a first instance of very much it not being a pre-planned career idea. It was just, here was the challenge we were trying to solve. Here was the problem we were trying to look at. And through that then came an opportunity to move into I suppose, the world of universities. Kind of obviously was kind of in the higher education sector through a students' union, but a switch over to the university side of things. And then that was the beginning of the student communication part of my career, really. So I was at Southampton for a few years. I then saw a similar job open up at Middlesex University in London, which was a manager role, so student communications manager. So it was a good opportunity to take some career progression. And then once I was at Middlesex, my role kind of just expanded over time, really. I mean, I think it wasn't that I was particularly looking to take on the specific role I've got now in terms of student engagement and advocacy. In fact, that role didn't exist when I first started at Middlesex. It was just, I was interested in connecting the parts of the job I did have to the broader issues that I could see students were facing. And so naturally, as you do that, you are part of collaborative projects with other people, and you get to take on a bit more experience in different areas. And that then often leads to your role changing over time. So it was that same process which led me to this topic of student belonging, just showing an interest in some of the broader issues I could see our students were facing, and actually help from mentors and kind of senior leaders as well, who over the time I've been at Middlesex have seen the work I'm doing and have said, why don't you try and help us with this particular challenge that we can see our students are facing? So we had a director of learning, teaching and student experience called Emily McIntosh, who some people in the sector might know because she's done a lot of publishing and talking around student success, personal tutoring. She's now at the University of West Scotland, but back when she was at Middlesex, she was a really good advocate for me in terms of being able to think about this broader topic of student belonging and how that's something that was underpinning a lot of what we were trying to do with our student engagement work. So it was really just that type of conversation which then led me to think, oh, maybe I should look into this in a bit more detail. And obviously that's kind of what then prompted me to do the PhD on that topic. So yeah, really not pre-planned. It is quite rambling. It's kind of just, what are the big challenges that you can see the students are facing? What are the big challenges of the institution that you're at? Being open to conversations with senior leaders who are trying to solve those challenges, who are responsible for those challenges, and seeing how your work can fit into it. And I think that's probably really the thing which has led to my role changing over time and getting to the place that it is now, rather than it being anything that I would have, sought after from the beginning.
And one of the early career stages you mentioned there was moving from being the SU president at Southampton through to becoming a member of staff in that university.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that meant that you had to form different or new relationships with some of the people you'd worked with in your previous role. How did you go about doing that? And is there anything from that experience that you've taken then into subsequent parts of your career in forming relationships with people?
Yeah, it is a very weird one, because you're right. And there are plenty of people in the sector who did start off as a student union officer, so will relate to this challenge. Obviously, as a student union officer, you're given a huge amount of positional power. The doors that are open to you, the meetings that you can get, you can get a conversation with the vice chancellor very quickly, very easily, in a way that other people just can't. And so you get opportunities to get through the door, get a meeting on, most topics that you want to discuss with most people that you want to discuss with. But the role can only get you through the door. And then I suppose what you have to work out as an officer is what you actually do when you're in the room. How do you build the relationship with that person? How do you work out what their priorities are and how those overlap with your own? So I think being a student union officer helped me realize that just getting the meeting doesn't get things done. You kind of have to then think, what's the overlap you've got with that person? What's the areas of commonality? And that kind of more personal power, you might call it, that those connections you can build with other people that you can then call on because of the affinity you've built with that person. That's something you'll have in every role. So when I left the Students' Union and left all of that positional power, left being able to have a meeting with anyone that I wanted, you still had those relationships you'd built up by those past projects you'd worked on with people, where you'd both been able to work out, well, what's the thing we're trying to work on together? What's the thing that we're both trying to solve? And hopefully having success in doing that. So I still had those relationships that I was able to utilize a little bit as I moved over to being a staff member. But I think that the biggest thing was just that I learned that in any role, you're given a level of positional power. You've got a level of what you can get done just by saying, this is my role. So please, can we meet and talk about this? But you will always have, and therefore it's always important to focus most on what's the personal power you're bringing. What are the relationships that you're developing and investing in, because you're recognizing that everyone has a different set of priorities and deadlines and stresses. And by being able to think about, okay, well, what's the stuff that we've got the overlap? Where's the areas that we're both focusing on? You get to have hopefully just a really nice mixture of relationships across your institution that you can then know you've got people to turn to during difficult times, but also people that you can rely on, like when things are really stressful, or you've got a project where you need to just crack on immediately with something, you can be like, oh, can you help with this part? I really need to get this from you. So I think it was a big learning process early on around the importance of building up those relationships, which continue past any individual role that you have.
Let's delve a bit more into your role and the variety of work that you and your team are doing. Can you tell us a bit more about the work you do to support students directly, as well as the work you do in supporting other colleagues to support students?
Yeah, absolutely. It probably is my favorite part of working in the student engagement and student experience realm, which is just really, we do get to work with so many different teams and people across our university. And I love that because you do get to have both your direct work, as you say, but a huge amount of indirect work which benefits students. So my team work with most professional services across the university to get their support and opportunities more directly out to students. I think that's the direct impact we have. We are front facing in terms of writing the communications, producing the content, running the events, running the campaigns, which help our students know what the opportunities are for them whilst they're studying, what the support available is, and positioning it in a way that's relevant to them. There's so much stuff that our professional service colleagues want to get out to students. And obviously, all of them think that their bit is the most important thing that we have to offer for our students. So our challenge, but I think the thing that we are here for, our responsibility, is being able to work out what are our students' priorities at different points through their journey, and how can we make sure at any point we're getting the relevant content there for the student based on what their priority is at that point, and being able to reassure our support service colleagues that there will be a point in the journey that a student will be a priority for them. It just might not be that their service opportunity is the priority all the time. It's being able to help them see through the eyes of the student. So that's kind of the direct work that we have. And, that's across things like mental wellbeing support services, library, learning support areas, employability, all those different kind of professional service teams. The areas where I suppose we are more indirectly supporting students is how we are equipping and supporting our academic colleagues, who really are the ones with the most access to the students. They're the ones who build up the affinity with our students. They're the ones where our students will turn first when they're in kind of any form of trouble or crisis, or even when they've got great news they want to share. So our role there is a combination of things like learner analytics work. It's through resources and templates we can provide for our academic staff. What we're trying to do through all of the work that we do in our central team is make sure that academic staff have the information about support services and opportunities, so that they can also be doing their role of promoting those to students at the different times when students might need it through the journey. So yeah, very broad in that sense. I think the direct work is when we do our direct communications and engagement work with students, but a lot of it, I think increasingly, more of the work we're doing is around equipping academic staff to have the information they need all at the right time, also in a way that's not overwhelming to them, because they've obviously got a lot that they've got to deal with. So they won't have just endless time to read emails from old David saying, oh, students might want to know about this week, or here are some students that we can see through our learner analytics work having low engagement at the moment that you might want to prioritize. That's kind of the bit that I think is becoming an increasingly important part of the work we do centrally in our student engagement team.
You mentioned at the start that you moved to Middlesex University in 2016, so 8 years or so ago. And since that time, I mean, from listening to what you were just saying in the previous answer, your role is broad. The team, I imagine, has grown since that time. And you really are a core part of supporting student success, whether that's directly working with students or, as you say, working with other professional services or working with academics, and therefore really supporting the university's strategic goals. What reflections do you have about how the student engagement professional niche has evolved across the sector during that time?
Yeah, I do think it has evolved a lot. I do think it used to be the case, 10, even, maybe 15 years ago, but I think definitely in some places, even just a decade ago, that you'd have universities thinking the way that we get information through to students is just done locally via academics or individual support services, just sending out emails to students on all of the bits they want to get out there. And our responsibility as a university is just to know that we've sent the email. If we've done that, we'll assume the students have read it, they'll engage with it, and they'll make sense of it themselves. And I think what we realized is that that doesn't always happen. It leads to students being bombarded, being overwhelmed with information being sent at a time when it's not necessarily relevant to them, overlapping content, not being presented in a way which is engaging to students. It just doesn't see things from the student's point of view. So I do think the student communications area and the broader field of student engagement work has evolved a lot over that time, recognizing that if we see things from the student's perspective and recognize that the more we can do to get our students to engage in their studies and the broader university experience, the bigger chance they have of success. That actually that's something we do want to be part of. That is something we want to be investing in. We do want to recognize that our students, especially in the UK context, are paying more as a kind of a proportion of their contribution to university through the increase of fees. We do want to recognize that the needs of our students are more complex perhaps than they were, whether that's through the huge, wonderful progress that's been made around widening participation. There's just a recognition that the idea that we have one single journey of students in terms of needs that they'll have, and therefore we can send one batch of emails out to everyone about what's going on and just leave them to get on with it. We know that that just doesn't really work anymore, or at least it's far too simplistic. So I do think more and more expectation is placed on student engagement professionals to try and think about what the needs of each individual student are and be able to then present to those students what the university has to offer in the right way and time for them. That is very, very difficult. The expectations have grown. The team sizes haven't always grown. You constantly hear from folks around the sector ways in which they've been given more responsibilities when it comes to what they're supposed to do in their student engagement work, but they've been given those greater expectations, but not necessarily been given more resource to achieve those types of changes the university is hoping to see. I think that's going to be often the case, especially in current times where resources are constrained. But what we do know is that we now see student communications work expanding into things like learner analytics, so the ways in which we use student engagement data to respond on that more personal level. It goes into the ways we support academic staff to think about not just their pedagogy and supporting them with course design, but also thinking about relational pedagogies, the ways in which they are helping students to develop that sense that they matter at university, the ways in which students feel that they've got wraparound support services, so no matter what they're going through, especially with the increased prevalence of mental health diagnosis or illness amongst students, that there is a removal of any stigma around help-seeking behaviours from students. There is a lot, there's a very much this increasing expectation of the roles in which student engagement teams can have an impact. I think that obviously is the thing to see as a positive, because it means our profession is being seen, as you put it in the question, as a more integral part to universities achieving their overall goals when it comes to student success. The challenge is around how do you make sure you've got resource and capabilities to meet those expectations. So I definitely see that as an interesting challenge for the sector as a whole. In terms of what we've done at Middlesex in that area, just to kind of very briefly speak about that, I do think that I love personally that our team has this very close connection with the professional services around mental health and wellbeing support, so we can make sure that we are getting information about the support available to students in a way which removes that stigma as much as possible and helps them to seek that support, that we're involved much more in learner analytics work so we can personalize the engagement activities that we put forward to students based on what we can see for them and how they're experiencing their time at university, that we can think about moving away from just using email to other digital platforms and spaces where we know students are spending more of their time, getting away from just this idea of sending out the message and that being enough to how are we getting students to be meaningfully contributing to those conversations. So I think that that's what makes the role in the area so exciting.
You've recently submitted your PhD, congratulations,
Thank you.
which focuses on student belonging. Now, we could spend a whole episode or more talking with you or other colleagues about that journey of completing a PhD while also working, and maybe we'll do that in a future episode. But for this episode, I'm interested to know more about that experience of doing the PhD and how it's informed your own professional practice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a wonderful, if not at some points, crazy journey in terms of doing that part-time alongside working. As you say, that's a huge topic for another time. What I will say is that I have felt that doing the PhD has really helped me think more about the ways in which the work we do around student engagement can be centered around the academic experience that students have. And partly that's because I suppose it's been easier to build up conversations with academic colleagues, having that personal connection of having gone through a PhD, which many of them will have done as well, or also be on their journey of kind of completing a doctorate. So there have been so many opportunities where by doing research on this specific topic, I've then been invited to give talks or presentations to academic colleagues at Middlesex and other universities as well. And that's helped me focus a bit more on the fact that when it comes to something like student belonging, there will be some students who really care about making friends at university. There will be some students who want to be part of all the extracurricular activities. There will be some who really want to be an advocate and an ambassador for their university because they love that idea of the kind of more American style university experience of being part of that big branded university community and team. There are students who have all of those things, but what we do know is that almost every student cares about their academic experience and that sense of belonging within what we would call the academic domain. So I've been able to, through the PhD, have many more conversations with academic colleagues around how myself in our central support service team can be supporting them in that endeavour, whether that's through collecting feedback from students on what helps them feel a sense of belonging in the classroom, to, as I was saying before in previous answers, kind of equipping academic colleagues to know what's going on more broadly around the university so that they can join up those conversations. I think that's probably the most obvious immediate way in which doing the PhD has changed the work that we've been doing at Middlesex, and it's brought us, at least me personally, much closer in contact to more academic colleagues, where again, I know they're making that difference every day to help our students feel a sense of belonging in that classroom.
You became a member of the Middlesex University Board of Governors in 2022 as the Professional Services Staff Representative. And I know from reading up about you, you've had some previous governance experience, including when you were SU President at Southampton, but as well at a youth action organisation and as a high school governor. Now, unless you're a member of a university or HEI board or regularly attend to present items, that board setting can be quite an enigma, and yet it has a key responsibility in the functioning of an institution. What insights can you share about what it's like to be in that board setting, and is it how you thought it would be?
It's a really interesting setting. I love it, and this isn't just university boards as well, so whether this is a school governor position or a charity trustee board, what I love about those settings is that the role of a good governing body is to have expertise from a broad range of people so that they can provide critical challenge and advice and guidance to the executive, to the management on whatever they might need to make the organization successful. That means that you need to have someone who's an expert in legal matters, in finance matters, in construction or building kind of areas, estates. You need someone who's an expert in perhaps the needs of the audience that the charity or the organization is leading for. You need all of these people who are expert in different ways, all sat around the table together. And so what I love about it is, that means you are constantly learning from people who know about things that you have no idea about. You're right there hearing what the kind of expert insights are from someone who's got expertise in areas that you just do not. But it also means that you know that you're there because you bring something that no one else brings. It's a really helpful way to give you the confidence to know that you can share insights and ask questions from your own perspective. And that adds something that no one else is going to add. So you learn loads from it, and it helps give you the confidence to know that you can contribute things in that setting. So I think it's a really brilliant thing to do wherever you are in your career. There are, as I said, there's loads of good charity trustee board opportunities where they're looking for people to contribute their time, to volunteer their time. If you do get a chance to be part of your university board as a staff member representative, I would 100% recommend it. There's a lot of wraparound support as well. So I know that Advanced HE do really good training programs when people join university boards to help equip them for that setting. Whether it's learning about how all the financial regulations sit together or the responsibilities of the Office for Students and what your expectations there are as a board member, you will get plenty of support for it. You will gain a huge amount from it. And I do think that it gives you an opportunity to contribute to the priorities and the ways in which your university is going forward that will be on matters you care about. So I love being in that board space and being able to make sure that student experience is part of every conversation, not just the updates we're having around the NSS. When it comes to looking at our portfolio as a university, be able to make sure that we're not just looking at recruitment figures, but also looking at, well, what is the feedback from students on whether we teach that course well? Are we actually known to be a provider that is good at teaching this subject in terms of the experience our students have? So you can contribute a lot and you get a lot from it. I would, 100% recommend it to anyone who's thinking about going for an opportunity like that.
And you've mentioned there about the board taking that strategic oversight of the university's progress. And also, you've also mentioned there about, the focus on the student experience and needing to ensure that as many students as possible succeed and are happy with their experience at Middlesex. Your role on the board is generic. I mean, in that board setting, you're there as the professional services staff representative, albeit you do have the professional expertise on student matters and student engagement. But it's a different setting to how the role you might have on another university committee. How do you balance up having those two hats and contributing to the board in the best way possible? I guess they're very lucky to have you for both fronts.
It is a real challenge. I do think this is honestly the hardest part of having that board responsibility, because the two hats are very different and it is important to keep some level of distance between them. But I don't know, I think we often have multiple hats in our lives, don't we? It's just interesting to have two, both in the professional setting. I suppose in terms of how I've balanced the two, as you say, spot on in the question, if you are a staff representative on your board of governors at your university, you are not there to defend or try to be a representative to other professional services staff. That's what trade unions are there for. They are there to represent the interest of staff. You're there to bring one perspective, which is your own, which will be well informed. You will have a huge amount of experience that you can bring to the board. And ultimately, once you get there on the board, the way I've been seeing it is just that you're there, like everyone else, to root for the university to be successful. And you will bring a position and a set of experiences that will help you ask questions and make good challenges towards that end that other people around the room won't have, especially because the vast majority of those people will be external. They will be bringing expertise from other places around the sector, many people outside the higher education sector who have very little understanding about how a university actually runs, and they will value your contributions a huge amount because you're able to give that perspective in a completely honest way. Not to say that the reports they're getting from management and executive aren't honest, but obviously they are updating on strategic matters and presenting their progress. You can give really honest accounts of what it's actually like on the ground in terms of how those strategies are being implemented, how they're being received. So you've just got to get to that place where you're realizing you're there to root for the success of the university from whatever angle you bring from your own professional expertise. You're not there to be a representative for all staff. And, hopefully it goes without saying, but you're not there to advance your own interests. There are some really good public principles, the Nolan principles, which give really clear advice around how to act if you are part of a board or a charity trustee board or a governor for a school. And a lot of them are just around being a decent human being, but they flesh them out in quite a useful way. But you're certainly not there to advance your own interest, to do anything which might present a conflict of interest for yourself. It is a challenge balancing those two hats. I certainly do have conversations in my day job where I know I've got information from my board role that would be inappropriate to share. And so you have to navigate a way to be able to have that conversation with someone honestly, whilst letting them know that there may be things that you can't share. That's good experience as well in terms of learning about confidentiality. It will often be the case that there are things that we may know that would be inappropriate to share, but you certainly have a lot of that if you've got a board role and you're hearing updates on where the university's finances or strategic change might be going into the next area of the year. So that is a challenge to navigate. But again, I think it's just a useful skill that you're getting a chance to develop through having those two roles.
Wrapping up our conversation today, you have an increasing sector presence, including with the Association of Higher Education Professionals, Advance HE, Wonky, and Universities UK. And you talked earlier as well about having opportunities to go and talk to other universities. And no doubt your PhD findings are going to be of interest to many people in the times ahead. What do you think should be the sector's focus on student belonging during the next 5 years? And how do you see the professional services remit evolving to support that?
I really like the idea that we get to work across the universities on these challenges, because I don't think that the needs and experiences and challenges of students at Middlesex are hugely different from those other London universities or other universities around the country. Even across the world, there's far more overlap than there is differences. So I do like opportunities to connect with other universities through sector organisations to work through these types of challenges. So, okay, top question. What are the big things that we should be focusing on? I believe very strongly on the connection between student belonging and staff belonging, and the idea that we are not going to address the challenges in student belonging that we've seen post-pandemic by running our staff into the ground. We're not going to be able to make big progress on this by just giving more work to staff and expecting them to be able to cope with it through all of these challenges. So I do think that I would be very cautious against universities adding more stuff on top of what they're already doing and seeing student belonging as another strand of our strategies around student success. It's not about running more events. It's not about having more drop-in sessions. It's not about having more activities where we are asking more of ourselves and also asking more of our students. I think that actually leads to, first of all, staff burnout in terms of their day jobs and what they're expected to do. It also leads to a lot of staff dissatisfaction when they're putting a lot of effort into these activities and they're not seeing students turn up for them. And students aren't turning up because they've already got plenty on their plate as well. So I do think we've got to be cautious around this idea that student belonging is adding extra. Instead, I think it's about being able to have as almost an underlying lens for everything we've already been doing with our students. It's about recognizing that every student has different needs at university. They have different priorities. What they want to get out of their university experience is different. And the most important thing we can do is have those early conversations with our students to help them better understand what their goals are and reassure them that no matter what their priorities are, there will be support in place for them, and almost equip our students to better then access and navigate the support that we've got for them. It's really a careful navigation between not taking away students' agency and just giving them everything and seeing student belonging as our responsibility, but also not flipping completely the other way and saying this is all on you. This is your responsibility to feel a sense of belonging here. So just go ahead and find your place at university. It's being confident enough that we can navigate that tension between our responsibilities and our students' responsibilities when it comes to student belonging. I think if we can do that, it will mean that we better understand what our students want to get out of their time at university so that we can put support and opportunities in place that are more relevant. But it will also mean that we're not burning out our staff in the process by just constantly adding more. Sometimes I know that's uncomfortable because those ideas of adding more can feel like the obvious first thing to do. So again, I think it's being confident enough to sit in that discomfort when we're doing our work around student belonging.
David, thanks for being my guest today. It's been really good talking to you, and thank you for letting me shadow you.
Thank you so much for having me, Susanna. Lovely questions. Great to be on the podcast, and all the best for the rest of the new series.
Thank you for listening to Job Shadowing HE. The podcast was written and presented by Susanna Marsden, audio production and music by me, Rodri Marsden. More information about this podcast and previous episodes can be found at jobshadowinghe.com.